Thank you so much, Delegate Guyton, for coming on today and talking with me. It's so nice to talk to you again.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your listeners.
Of course. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge your role in our community representing us in Annapolis, because first and foremost, you are literally the very first legislator that I can recall. And I've been following politics locally and federally for a very long time. But you're the very first one that is taking the autism community under your wing with a vengeance in Annapolis. And I have so much gratitude for you for that. I know that you're vested as an autism mom, and I'm not trying to take away from any of the other legislators who are also autism parents, but for, I guess, reasons of their own, maybe weren't in a place to head on, because it's a lot. It's a heavy-duty topic. It is very political, I think, in some aspects. And in our community, we know the statistics. We know the intensity of the need. But I don't know that the whole of the legislator truly understands the depth, the breadth, the scope of this epidemic, which I wholeheartedly believe autism is an epidemic, and I refer to it as that all the time. So I just wanted to say thank you for your effort, for your dedication, and you probably feel like you have a thankless job many days because you have to go up there and fight for everything that you believe in and that you believe in for your community. And I know that you do have support, because we'll get into this a little bit later, but looking at some of the bills that you got through, it was unanimous. So I know the support's there, but it doesn't make an effort that you do every day any less. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for that. I really, really, really appreciate that feedback. I agree with you. Autism is an epidemic, and I also agree with you that many legislators, even if they are dealing with it in their own families, and I mean, we know that at some level, almost everyone's dealing with it somewhere in their own families at this point. The education is still not there for most people to understand the real, I'll say, trials and tribulations, but also, the strengths and the positives of being on the spectrum. So one of the things that I really do feel is a mission for me in the General Assembly is to help educate my peers. And I do believe that that has certainly happened over the past 4 years since I've been there. I agree with you. There are other legislators who are very supportive of this work. But even I was surprised when I came in and was elected to the General Assembly. As a brand new delegate, like the first week, I walked in and said, okay, who's doing this work? Because I want to help them. I'm new. I'll do everything I can to jump on this bandwagon and to really help the kids and adults, and not only with autism, but with other issues who need our help. And, the answer I got was basically, well, that's going to be you. So, not because they don't care. They do care, and I will say that across the aisle, there are people who care very much and do support this work. But for it to be a primary priority, I think is rare in the General Assembly, and I'm so honored that I've been able to have that role, and certainly I hope to do a lot more than we've already done. But I also strongly believe it's very gratifying that my colleagues have supported many initiatives that I think will make a real difference in the lives of people with disabilities. Thank you. Yeah. That was a long answer to your to your intro, but I really appreciate that.
Appreciate, the thoughtfulness of it, because I know it's very complex in Annapolis. So we'll definitely dive into that. Would you mind just telling the audience a little bit more about yourself personally, why you're so vested and passionate?
I have always been incredibly interested in these issues. So I have a Ph.D. in Developmental Psychology with a specialization in Developmental Psychopathology, a lot of long words, which just means basically kids who have issues. And that's something that I've always been interested in. And I think I completed my Ph.D. during the time I was pregnant with my first son and started working on policy initiatives for child psychology. And I was very interested in not only research, but applied research and how to develop policy to actually help the lives of women and children, but also dads, but families, women and children in particular, because I also have a master's in women's studies, which is now gender studies, but back in the day, it was a fairly new thing. So the interest was there, and I think sometimes the universe just has a way of preparing you for things that you don't know that you should expect, and for me, that was the case. So the baby that I had while I was finishing my PhD actually is on the autism spectrum, and I think we knew fairly early, well, very early, because I used my babies all along as research subjects. And so I would take them I remember taking the oldest, Boris, to friends' labs, other graduate students or other professors' labs to be tested, do brain scans and all sorts of things to help them collect data for their research. And I was doing an attachment study, and I was testing a whole lot of 1-year-old babies. And my child didn't respond the way that the typically developing babies responded. I thought at that time, I mean, he was so precocious in a lot of ways. And I know that those of us with kids on the spectrum kind of see that sometimes too, is like he was great at these things. And we kind of have a weird and wacky and super smart family. If you look at my husband's family and my family, and we just thought, he's an eccentric toddler. And he's really smart in some ways. But, he really had deficits in others. So, he was never able to. And your audience already knows what autism looks like, so I won't go to. But I think when he wasn't able to attend any early preschools or to participate in some of the toddler baby activities that I would take him to, it became clear that the social interactions and the sensory overload was too much for him. And at that point, he was not actually diagnosed with autism. He was diagnosed initially with sensory dysfunction and processing disorders and all of those other things that we hear when we have young children who have issues like that. He didn't, I think, get his actual diagnosis of autism until he went to kindergarten, and the teacher was like, yeah, this kid's on the spectrum. And at that time, we were actually told that by the evaluators and by the school system, that he probably would need to be in a self-contained classroom. That we should not have high expectations of him, basically. And I'll remember that conversation forever. That he probably wouldn't go to college, that he probably, would need supports, throughout education, and that we couldn't expect him to be mainstreamed and to participate in the kind of life we'd envisioned. So I know a lot of your listeners go through this. There's a bit of you love your child, but there's a bit of a mourning period for the life that, you expected them to have.
Just to take that one step further, part of what's tied up in that mourning and grief period, I think, at least for me, was the way that information's presented to you. Very difficult.
Right.
It's hard.
Right. And he's 26 now. So back in the day when they were doing, autism itself was fairly, and we knew about it. A lot of kids weren't being diagnosed at that time. It was sort of just becoming a part of the vernacular in the school system. People were still trying to figure it out. And really, they were still using IQ labels like moronic and they're in the categories. And so I remember I was processing with somewhere about and I know you have a well-educated group here, so like 75 or and then another one of his scores was like 50 or under, and they're like, no, this kid is just not going to be able to function. Like his scores are too low. He was very verbal. He'd always been very verbal, so he does not have that. He has difficult processing language, and he has difficulty responding appropriately. But he does have language. So, and that all has gotten better. So, but yeah, the brutality of that meeting. When I say I still remember the exact moment I was told that, it's the brutality that I remember. It's the you better just get ready because he's not going to be able to do much. And we, both my husband and I, we're both there in that appointment, and both my husband and I got in the car afterwards. And I think at the same time, it was like, we don't like her. It was like, we forget everything we just heard. Like we can both recognize that there are severe challenges and still have very high expectations of our child. And I think that that's the way that we've always tried to approach it. And, and he's actually, his reality is about as fabulous as I think, with some struggles as I think it could be. And he's had a lot of people believe in him over the years, and that's incredibly important. We had a lot of therapy, and this is one thing that really drives my work. And I was on the State Board of Education prior to running for office. And what drove me to go for that position is that I felt like I'm a psychologist. My husband is an MD, and we had trouble trying to get the services we need. We had trouble identifying, and just full disclosure, I also have Tourette syndrome in my family, and my kid with on the spectrum also has some tics, so that's something I've spent a lot of time on as well. We had trouble figuring all of this out, even with all the training and all the resources really, that we have. And so my commitment to the community is, everybody should have the same resources. Everyone should have the same availability of therapies. We were able to find speech therapists. We were able to find PTs very early, tons of occupational therapists, like every sort of possibly encouraging therapy there was for our child from a very early age. And I know that's not available to everyone, but it should be. So that is my end game here in the work that I do. So yes, he did end up going to a private school in Baltimore, Baltimore Lab School, which was sort of in its infancy at that time. It's now gotten a lot bigger, but when he started, it was in a house on Roland Avenue, and it was a direct offshoot from one of the programs at American University. And what I loved about that was, of course, very small classes, very innovative and creative curriculum that was sensory-based and was very artistic and progressive. And, I loved the program. And what that did for him, he still didn't kill it socially, let's be honest, but it gave him an enormous amount of self-esteem about who he is. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the biggest challenges I've seen, particularly in one of my other sons who deals with, Tourette syndrome and some other issues that aren't necessarily on the spectrum, is the self-esteem and the depression and the anxiety that kicks in with some of those. And I believe because of this early setting for him and, all the people he had rooting for him all the time, he has not struggled with that. And that to me is a miracle. And it's also probably the reason for the successes that he's had. He believes in himself and he knows he's different, and he considers that different to be better, which sometimes we have to deal with that. But yeah, so but he did transfer. He spent all of up to sixth grade there, and then he did transfer to public school afterwards with a lot of help and intervention from me, to be honest. Really, educating teachers and being over involved. So, but there's no advocate like a mom.
Right. And he done so well, not that it was easy on you or him, but he's done so well that he's in college now, right? Yes, and he's actually in a graduate program. He had to find very specific programs that worked for him all the way through. So he cannot, he's actually home right now for a couple of days, so I'm trying to make sure he doesn't hear me. But he can't write very well. English is not his, we say English is not his first language. Math is his first language. So he's very talented in math, and he loves sciences. And so he ended up going to a college that required no writing. Basically, he went to a technology school that trained engineers and physicists, and they had no writing requirement. Even that was not easy. I mean, he failed several classes. What I say is the path is not straight. The path is fraught with difficulties, but eventually he gets there. He took him extra time and, a lesser class load and a lot of supports, but, he did graduate and was able to do a master's at that same program in physics. So he's currently enrolled in a Ph.D. program, which we're so proud of him for doing that. He is having some difficulty there with not the challenges of the work, but the challenges of the social interaction of,
working in the lab and working with advisors and that sort of thing. So, again, there are always there are always challenges, and I just remind him, every time he thinks he's done, he's not.
That's
so.
Right. And I mean, I can't imagine how incredibly proud you are of him.
I am, and he's the most persistent person I know. It takes him twice as long to do everything. I mean, even the math that he's great at, it takes him twice as long to do it than, a neurotypical child. He was the only person that the graduate record exams, the GRE testing center, had ever heard of and he had to actually fly to a specific location, fly to New York to take the GREs, because the only person applying to physics graduate schools ever that they remembered who needed complete double time on that. It wasn't something they offered, and it was something that we had to fight for. But had he not had it, he would have failed that test. So, even at very high levels, there are supports that have to be in place.
That's right. It's sort of that round peg in the square hole thing. We're trying to expect our community who have sensory processing challenges, who think differently, who interpret the world around them differently, who all around function differently, to fit to all of our mainstream offerings of the world. And I think we all have a vision of what we want out of this in the future, but it's enough for killed.
That's a great analogy, really thinking about fitting the square peg into the round hole. I think the goal should be that the holes are amorphous, right? the holes should be changeable for what kids need, or I call everyone kids, because even with with my son, when he was applying, he applied to like every graduate school under the sun, to be honest, because he knew what his problems were or his challenges, and he interviewed at quite a few. And this is going to sound sad, but it just shows how, you have to plan your life around you and what your needs are. He only actually got accepted to the one he did not interview personally at. And I think that makes sense to those of us who understand the challenges of autism. They were just looking at scores and the work and what he could do. And the others, he probably seems a little bit different. And even in physics, where a lot of people are on the spectrum, still a little bit more out there than some. So, but he found the right spot, and he's doing well. So yeah, that's so far a success story, and it will be a success story no matter what happens.
Absolutely. How did he do when he first went away to college?
I was not okay. Yeah, I was not okay. And again, it's just about being creative about him. He took a Chinese program throughout the school, and he did fairly well. So he speaks some Chinese. And the teacher in the Chinese program, and the reason that we kept encouraging him to do it, said, a lot of his social awkwardness disappears when he speaks Chinese, because he knows the rules and he has to follow them. And he went to this school, like I said, a very tech-oriented college, where there were a lot of Chinese students. So he actually made a lot of Chinese friends. Or a few, not a lot, a few, because they thought it was hilarious to see this like super tall, like really pale, obviously non-Chinese kid who's super awkward trying to talk to them in Chinese. So, I think that's also something to consider for our kids who, we were told, look, Chinese is the hardest language. He can't take Chinese. Well, yeah, sure they can. They will find their way, at least. And I remember saying to the school system, and this is a hard moment. I said, he may not be successful in this. And this was probably 10th grade. And he was failing classes in high school because he wouldn't talk to his professor, to his teachers. Same reason he failed classes in college, or that he was really afraid to say he didn't understand the work or something. It was all communication related. I remember sitting down with him saying, okay, it may seem unreasonable to think that he's actually going to be a physicist and go to graduate school, that he's wanted to do that since he was 10. But do you want to be the one to shut that door for him? Let him shut that door himself. Right. We have to work to help him decide what's going to work. And if it means, so instead of saying we shouldn't put him in these hard classes because he's not going to do well, he's willing to try. He's willing to fail. And he should be the one making those decisions. So, and that's how he has gotten as far as he has. He has failed, but then he picks back up and redoes it.
I love that you gave him the space and the choices. So important. Always present with choices. They are human beings first. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm so happy for you and for your son and your whole family for how well he's doing. And I know it's really hard every day.
Yeah, no, we're really proud of him, proud of how hard he works. And, but there are those things that people think that means that he doesn't have challenges. And in fact, I have to help pay his rent, and he has trouble with, negotiating those things that all people on the spectrum have trouble negotiating. So I will look over an email that he's writing later today to make sure it makes sense, and it doesn't read like a manifesto. So, those are the things that, they're real and they're there. But he's doing a great job. And I think generally he's happy. And that's really all that matters in the end.
Absolutely. So let's shift a little bit into your work. And at what point did you decide you wanted to run for delegate? Like, had it been back of your mind for a while?
No, it had not. It actually had not at all. So when I was on the State Board of Education, there were a lot of initiatives, particularly in mental health and disabilities, that I wanted to push forward. And there were many things that I couldn't do in that position. And often, legislation, everything was in statute that was really important, and it had to be changed by legislation. And so I was really, at that point, kind of frustrated with the fact that the legislature was able to do all these great things and I couldn't. So, we did great things at the state board, but it was at a different level. And so I think that was planted in my head. But when there was actually an opening in my district, and I looked at who was running and thought I had something different and better to offer, and jumped in. And it's generally a very conservative district, and I flipped it as a Democrat in 2018. So, it'll be a hard race this year as well, but I do think that, it's worth fighting for.
It absolutely is. And you have such staunch supporters in your district because of the work that you're doing. People out there who don't know, it's right now approximately 134 boys being diagnosed in the state of Maryland. Baltimore County is a huge county. You just have a lot of supporters. So I believe in you, and you're going to win it again because you have the record and you have the credibility, and you're just a lovely person, and everyone knows that.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you.
So we'll do everything we can to support you. You'll win it. You got it.
Okay, let's go with that. I like that.
Could we give the listeners an overview of some of the bills that you worked on over the last few years? I know, I remember talking to you 4 years ago, you were referring to yourself as a freshman, and it was almost like you're planting seeds, right? That year?
Yeah, no, I'm just so happy with the work and I don't say I've been able to do. It is a group effort, and the disabilities community has come out strong. And for most of my bills, I have a great team in my office and tons of great advisors. So it really is a group project, which makes it even more fun than if I were just out there slogging it on my own. But I think there are a couple of things that I see as game changers. And I hope they end up being game changers. Now, certainly the way that you pass a bill isn't always the way it's implemented. So I do follow up on that. The first most obvious one for this podcast is the Autism Coordinator and Stakeholder group that we passed back in, second year I was there. So 2020. We passed. Now, unfortunately, that took a long time getting off the ground because COVID happened and everyone sort of stopped working. And to be honest, I haven't felt that the commitment from our administration has been what I would have liked to have seen for this issue, considering how many Marylanders it affects. So we had a long time getting it funded and getting someone appointed. I actually am going to my first meeting tonight, so I'm excited. There will still be changes. Every year I come in with a few tweaks to the bill based on, how it looks like it's going. So it's not a one and done. It's an evolving and growing document project. But the idea behind it is that for the first time, and one of the first, probably the first state in the U.S., we would have someone appointed, at a high level in a state position whose only job is to work with the autism community, and more importantly, to develop a strategy of how we can address the problems that not only are affecting us now in the community, but we know are coming down the line as people grow older. And so, they're in the bill is very specific, what this job entails. And right now, for the next year, really just working with this stakeholders group of activists, professionals, parents, self-advocates to we know what the problems are, so now we have to work on the solutions. What is it that we can do to make things better? And, I want some very specific items that I can take into Annapolis and work towards. I mean, this, and yes, I'm going to be reelected. So assuming that the work coming out of this work group and this office probably be enough to keep me busy for a really long time.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So that one could be very, very important and groundbreaking. And I just want to point out the other one this year that I had, and I've done lots of things with changes with IEP and preparedness for gaps in services and things like that. A preschool early identification bill, which I think is going to hopefully be effective in getting more kids identified earlier, and so that they have better progress in school. But I think the other one this year that isn't getting a lot of attention because it's something that a lot of people deal with unless you are in this community is the reformation of the Division of Rehabilitation Services at the Maryland State Department of Education. So this is the group, the division that is responsible for job training and disability support for kids through transition, up until whatever age. And there are a lot of things that they can do better. They are also spending an enormous amount of money for each person that they are successfully serving and getting gainfully employed. So I was interested in that on the state board when I got to know a lot about this program, and I'm really happy that we got that passed this year because we need to really look carefully at that program and expand what they're doing and make sure that they're doing it as well and as efficiently as possible.
That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. So what will that look like? Is that something that will fall under the state coordinator?
No. Well, so currently the bill that was passed this year was for a work group that we appointed from outside the department and inside the department, also including clients, students and their parents and their families, those who have had good experiences with the program and those who have had very negative experiences with the program. And honestly, I wouldn't be putting the bill forward if there weren't many more people who had negative experiences or waited 6 to 9 years to even get services after graduation. It's just not okay. So that group is going to be responsible for making some recommendations, and some of them are very specific. So one of the recommendations that I'm asking for is, do we move this off? Do we take this out of the State Department of Education and put it under a different department? Right? Does it need to be in disabilities? Does it need to be in labor? Does it need to be self-standing? There are lots of ways that we can do this. Does it need its own board outside of the State Board of Education? And I feel that it does after serving on the state board and realizing that in the 4 years I was there, I don't believe DOORS was mentioned more than once or twice. Right? I think it deserves much more oversight than what it's getting, and from people who are committed. So my hope would be that, in fact, it would have a separate board of its own, made of, self-advocates and parents and folks from labor and kind of a different group of people that would serve on the State Board of Education. There are a lot of questions in that bill that they're supposed to answer. How can we cut waiting times? Better transitions between the school system DOORS and DDA. There are a lot of things, people who are falling through the cracks in with waiting times and with changing over from one program to the other. So these are all things that we're supposed to be working on there. And I am, again, with those suggestions and the work of the Autism Coordinators Group, I'll have plenty of bills next year. At least that's the goal, right? We're going to actually take this work and put it into action. No,
Absolutely.
we're not just going to talk about it.
There's so much work to be done. And so my son, Colin, is 16. He just turned 16. And so I'm sort of like right in the middle of everything.
Yes.
I know from this age to birth very, very well. And I'm learning transitional and adult services more and more, but it's very complex, and it's a lot of information, trying to balance, what's going on currently in his life, which is also very challenging. So when you said that some of these people are waiting 9 years after employment, after graduation, it is heart-wrenching because
it's terrifying. Yeah.
It is. It's terrifying. And it sounds like the autism waiver are all over again for the younger kids who many age out before they even have an opportunity to access that waiver. And I know that your state coordinator is very focused on that, but it is terrifying to hear that. I went through the policy program. It was like a collaboration for DDA and ARC, Partners in Policy Making. And I did that, I think, back in 2019. It was right before COVID. And I already felt like I had a solid foundation on policy. But I want to say that I learned a lot through that program. And my network tremendously. And I had the privilege to really get to know a lot of stakeholders in the community. It also magnified the complexity of all the issues that have been unattended for so many years. And with this going ever so quickly increasing, I just don't physically, it's unfathomable how our society is going to be able to support this generation of kids, because it's not stopping with my child's generation. It didn't stop with yours. It's just literally so incredibly overwhelming. And I just want to kind of tie that up by saying that thank God we have you doing this work. I also know that it takes many years to change once you have a thought in place. Once you plan, it takes years of change. Not saying that you did through some amazing bills, because you absolutely did, but like you said, it's always they're always sort of tweaking and evolving, right? But to get what our final sort of vision is for the support for our community is so ginormous that we're lucky if, maybe in 20 years we have somewhat of a handle on what's happening.
Well, just so you know, Diana, I'm not that patient. I agree with you. These things, you have to be somewhat patient to get these things done. But 20 years is not an okay deadline for me. So,
thank God.
Yeah. But I think if you don't start the work, right, then you're that much further behind. And I started this work on the autism group with the very first bill I put in was this one, I believe. It was for a work group to establish the needs, which we had a summer work group that then informed the development of the bill that ended up the next year passing. So, even this I've been working on since 2018, since before I was elected in 2018, as my first initiative. And, it's taken this long to really get it up and moving. And I do think COVID's a part of that. And I do think financial commitment's a part of that. Different conversation, but but we'd be 4 years further behind if we hadn't started working on it then. So I'm trying to push as hard as we can push on these issues. And again, 20 years, let's at least go to a 10-year plan. Now I'm asking for a 5-year plan, but I'm asking for things to be measurable, so that we know that we're making progress in all these different areas, housing, public safety. I know one of the biggest issues is healthcare, mental health care for these guys. There's so much that needs to be done. We can't wait to put it in. We've got to start working, and we also can't wait until it's all perfect. And I know that there is, you mentioned politics. I don't know that the politics, other than the funding, is what people expect. I mean, the funding is an issue politically, but the politics within the community can also be, tricky. You know that because you're in the community. And we all just have to be patient with one another and love each other and listen. And if it's not 100% perfect, we got to start. We got to start moving, because these are these are kids that are growing. Yours is 16, but he'll be 20 before you know it. So yeah, that's my goal.
You are on a mission, and
I am on a mission. Thank you.
I can't say it enough. I have so much gratitude for you for taking the lead on all of this and just working so diligently to make it happen. And I love your 5-year deadline. Of course.
we want to actually have something happening in 5 years. I'll give it 10 years to actually see really good effects of what we're doing. But we've got to have some changes, and we need them soon, really soon.
Yeah. And I'll, of course, do anything to support you in that. And you have a ton of parent advocates in the community who all support you. I do have a rapport relationship with a lot of local legislators. So what I hear the most, and everyone is very kind, and they're listening actively, and they want to learn and understand. And I would say probably, I've lost track. Everyone loses those 2 years of COVID. So almost 6 years ago now, I hosted a town hall in our local community, and we had our 4 local legislators, and Department of Disabilities was present. It was about 50 to 60 parents or stakeholders. The only reason I'm kind of giving you this backstory is to let you know that through all these conversations at the town hall, I just recently spoke with Delegate Krebs last week. The common thread is that we know how desperate things are. We hear all the time, and, they certainly hear from me very regularly. And the common thread that I hear is they don't know how to help. They want to support. I think that's probably why that your bills are unanimous, because they want to truly support and they want to help, but they don't know how. And I don't know if it's because of the lack of education, or is it because the scope is so large?
I think all of that, and I agree with you. I do think most people want to help. I will say not all of my bills are unanimous, but but they do. But they tend to do well. And a lot of that is the education, right? Is that I have been described as a little pushy, which is fine by me. I mean, I think if you aren't somewhat pushy and tenacious in this job, then you get pushed to the back of the room and you don't get what you need. So that's coming from being a parent with kids with disabilities, right? That's where that came from. So it's interesting. I do think the scope is huge. It is. It seems overwhelming. It seems overwhelming to you and me too, I'm sure. You have to be brave enough to jump into that. And I think it is, I do have advantage of understanding a lot of the dynamics and a lot of the specifics of the problems probably in a different way than they do. I know if somebody comes to me with, a problem changing laws about, something in digital technology, my eyes would kind of glaze over and I would say, I don't know anything about that. I will help, but you're going to have to find somebody more knowledgeable in that than me to champion this bill, because I don't have the time to go back to school to learn it. And I think that this area is sort of an area that falls under that umbrella, right? I have already gone to school to learn it, plus I'm living it, so it makes it a little easier for me and having written the regs, particularly from the state board perspective, I know the IEP process inside and out. I worked as an advocate with people, and so there is less of a learning curve. And so it's appropriate that I'm the one that takes that on. And again, I don't think it's because they don't care. It's because they look at it and go, this is really complicated, because it is. I will say for your listeners, even legislators who might be listening, the other program that I would highly, highly suggest, and I did this as a parent and as an advocate, not as a legislator, and I think it really changed the way that I interacted with schools and advocated for my kids, but it's also influenced the work that I do in the General Assembly, is that I did the rights law education work groups, and they do week-long trainings, and I think maybe even some weekend trainings. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Right. So WRIGHTS law. And that was so helpful for me, actually learning law as an advocate for my own child and learning sort of what the keywords and the code words could be, when you're trying to get something done in the school system. So I do recommend that for everyone. And there's a book that is associated with that called From Emotions to Advocacy, because we've all been in that place where we are just broken down and you can't jump immediately from there to really making a difference in your community. You have to go through that kind of grieving and mourning and getting your own self and your own family together first, because that's what's most important. And then you can help other people. But that book was also so helpful for me getting there. So I highly recommend both of those things. And there's a website you can look up almost any educational question, and they will help you.
I think this will be very empowering for families. I know that you're very busy in work, and I know you have a busy dad. I just adore you, and I'm so grateful for everything that you do for Maryland and our community. And I want to give you an opportunity to speak to your constituents, to get out and vote, and maybe give them the details of it again.
Yeah, thank you so much. I adore you as well. What I'm doing after this is I'm knocking doors for those constituents, and that is not as gratifying as talking to you, Diana. So that's probably why I could go on all day. This year is, it's an ugly political climate. It really is. It was not a fun political climate. Actually, back in 2018, politics were ugly, but now things are even worse. It is so important that people come out and vote. People who are educated about the truth. And if you hear something out there, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of negativity, do your research. There are big differences between candidates. And I think even before I was involved in this, I would think, they're kind of all the same. We are not all the same. we are definitely not all the same. So do your research, come out to vote. Make your friends and your family and everyone you know come out to vote by pestering them to death. And then if you have a minute to get involved, please, I mean, it can be as simple as, lend me 2 feet of your yard for a yard sign. That's really impactful. Wear a shirt and just stand at the polls for support. That's really impactful. And if people want to even do more, go around with me knocking in your neighborhood. You know these people better than I do, and they, would love to talk to you more than they would love to talk to me. So there are lots of ways that you can get involved. I will say that also, we're looking for interns and campaign staff. I am on the primary ballot. I do not have a primary opponent. I still need people to check the box, because if nobody does, I'll be very sad and very worried for the general. But in the general, I have a hard race, and it's going to be purely because I flipped a seat that the other party believes should be theirs, not based on any other merit. So I hope folks will help me and to get involved in that.
Well, I also wanted to point out that my oldest son, this will be the first election he is able to vote in, and he could not be more excited.
Yay!
So we have the whole generation of new voters. I think that, we always feel inspired by our younger generation. They're innovative, they're smart, they are so aware of what's going on in the political climate. When I was 18 years old, I was not, but my son is he's down there watching the congressional hearing right now as we talk.
Well, good for him. I think some of that comes from you, probably. You are involved now, and my boys are also involved, but that's because they hear and see a lot of it, but on their own too. They support some candidates that I don't necessarily, and they call me to account for any bill that I don't support enough in their opinion. So they really are good managers of holding me to account for anything that they think is important is usually what I also think is important. So it's a good balance.
Absolutely. Thank you enough, Michele. This has been so lovely, and enjoy the rest of your day. And we will certainly continue to be in touch and wish you the best of luck, but I know you're going to win.
Thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing too. And, you're doing more than this, but just being the kind of cheerleader you are, it goes a long way, and it keeps us going. So I'm going to go knock some doors and go to an autism meeting and spend some time with my son tonight, but I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.